You cannot hear?
Now I can speak this way. We can.
No, they complain a lot. They're always the ones who can't hear talk. Would you like to start with Mr. Wyatt? Or would you like to end with Mr. Wyatt?
Okay.
I thought I'd get that out of the way. It's a fair question.
I don't understand even your question.
I was going to talk about the two new installations. Okay. Shall we begin? Are you ready? Are you, Bebe? Welcome to Inside New York's Art World. I'm Barbara Lee Diamonstein, and we are at the Metropolitan Museum, the largest museum in the Western Hemisphere. In the past 10 years, our guest, Tom Hoving, has been described as the most accomplished and the most controversial museum director in the world. In the past several weeks, 2 significant shows have opened here. The permanent reinstallation of the entire Egyptian collection and his debut as a curator of contemporary art with the Andrew Wyeth Show. A critic last week said that the two represent, respectively, the best and the worst of Tom Hoving. What do you think of that assessment?
I think it's rather silly.
In what way?
But who is it? Who said it? Who was the critic?
Who was the critic?
Yeah.
I was.
Even sillier.
In what way is this museum unique? How does it differ from other museums?
It really is the only institution, not only in America but in the world, for very curious reasons, that is a balanced encyclopedia of all of the visual aspects of man's creativity. And from its very inception in 1870, it wanted to be this. The Metropolitan is, as its original charter said, to be a collection of the art of all mankind, a library of art for the purpose generally of popular instruction. The Metropolitan is very distinctly American. It is very distinctly democratic right from its very inception. It was not ever, and I'm quite sure that the founding fathers, because I've read a lot of the stuff in their early board meetings and implementing language about what the charter meant in fine details, I'm quite sure that it was deliberately intended not to be something like what you found abroad. It was not, for example, a lot of royal or noble collections gathered together and in some sort of a way given over to the people. It was not supposed to be a series of ethnographical objects sequestered very responsibly by colonial mentalities so that people in primitive cultures would not backslide into barbarism or paganism. It was supposed to be a professional balancing off of things to illustrate civilizations. Obviously, it was not supposed to be what the Louvre is, for example, in large measure gathering together of things that were taken in war. The people who started the place were educators, artists, and philosophers.
In what year was that?
Let me finish. And The charter indicates over the time that really the goal of the place is to form this encyclopedia, not to miss out on any volume of it, and to keep refining it. But the major emphasis is on what you do with it after you get it. And that is on recreation, which means the refreshment of the soul and the spirit and the eye, the betterment. It means education, a phrase that came in about 1918, not 1870. But from the very beginning, the phrase popular instruction was in it and has never left it. And this is pretty much why the place is unique. It has parts really of all. There's really no area that we don't have. The closest to it, I suppose, would be the Hermitage in the Louvre, although they have a lot of more emphasis upon things that came out of their own country. It's very difficult to find American furniture in the Louvre. It is not difficult to find French furniture in the Metropolitan, and so on. So it really is pretty highly curatorial in its formation. That's what makes it unique. Also makes it bewildering to some people, exhausting to others, awesome, and even terrifying to others. But this is it, and it was in 1870 that this general concept was laid out.
How should a stranger who is in the Metropolitan Museum for the first time for an afternoon take the most advantage of its riches? You refer to its bewilderment and its overwhelming nature to most people. What would you advise someone to do? How should they see this museum?
I think the first question to ask them would be, what is the general area of their interest over 50,000 years? And they might say Minoan, or they might say, I love early Egyptian things, or they might say, I like European paintings. And that's indeed what the people at our information desk, most of whom are volunteers, ask people. They try to get some general idea of what the visitor would like to have, because obviously it is all here. And under all of this architectural change, not only the additions on the outside, but the interiors, what we're trying to do is to lay out civilizations in lineal, single floor. We will not have what is now in the Greek and Roman, which is you have one part of it on one floor and you have to go upstairs and find a totally different part of it. Every single one of these large pieces of civilization will be on a single floor. Egypt will be all on the one floor, north, etc.
Is that what the first phase of the Egyptian reinstallation is directed towards?
Well, the first phase is simply a convenient half to start off the installation of 45,000 works of art, all on view, plus the Temple of Dendur, which will be opened up in 1978 with the second half. Now, the problem with the first half, it's really a curious half, and it's forced upon us by one of the great planners and sensitive designers of our day, the building department of the city of New York, which said you really cannot go down one side chronologically to Hatshepsut 18th dynasty and have people come back. We would have preferred to just crunch along chronologically and do half and then finish off the other half, but they said we simply cannot have that because you must have a circulation with an entrance and an exit for obvious safety reasons. And we said fine, that's why you start off at 300,000 BC and get to the 11th dynasty and then lose the 12th through the 28th dynasty and pick up at the 29th and then go to the end of it. That's why there's a curious gap of some thousands of years, but that will be corrected.
You make reference to the Temple of Dendur. Can you describe that?
The Temple of Dendur is a very late Egyptian temple in the canonical style, built for two young men who were drowned and therefore martyred in a curious sense in the River Nile. Their names were Ptesi and Pihor. It was built in Nubia, which had its own kind of architectural design. It's very Nubian in its feeling. It was built during the time of the Emperor Augustus, which indicates to you that it is a rather late Egyptian manifestation, not quite as late as Aida, however, but it's in more toward Aida than it is toward Cheops.
Are you telling us it isn't the first-rate example of temple architecture?
I am not telling you that.
How would you evaluate it?
I would evaluate it by saying that what it is, which is obviously Egyptian style of Roman period, it is, I think, probably superior than any other Egyptian temple now in the United States.
In the 10 years that you've been
Of which
here,
there are no others, obviously, because it's an enormous thing. It has a pylon, a sanctuary. It is covered with inscriptions and figures in sunken relief. And it is, we went after it because we collect architecture here. We do that because we want to explain by whole pieces of architecture and environments really the scale and the flavor and the feeling of those obviously smaller things which are on pedestals and in cases. And as much as we possibly can, we collect whole pieces of architecture, pieces of the interior.
there are other environments. Can you describe some of them?
The others are Perinebis Haf Mastaba, various Mastaba facades and false doors and windows. We have a room of the 17th century from Damascus in the Islamic wing. We have many period rooms from Western European area, from the 16th century all the way up indeed to about 1910. An Art Nouveau room, not yet installed but will be. In America, and obviously most of the American thrust here has been period rooms, and they run from the 17th century all the way up to one that was built in 1913 for the family of Little that Frank Lloyd Wright designed in Ways out of Minnesota, taking the great salon from that house and placing it in the new American wing. The Blumenthal patio is a 16th century Spanish central courtyard of a beautiful palace built by Italian stonemasons. We will have in the new primitive wing a longhouse from the Sepik River, which also helps explain that particular culture. Cloisters obviously is a museum for architecture primarily, so it's a very heavy emphasis upon that, and it turns out to be all right.
In the 10 years that you've been here, the museum has reached its peak attendance. It's mounted more exhibits than ever before. Its physical size has been vastly expanded. Its collection has grown. What do you think of as the most significant changes that have taken place?
Barbara Lee, I think it's, I was hired for one reason, and pretty much only one, and that was, would I be able to complete the building, which had been started in 1878 and kind of dragged on. There'd been a number of overall comprehensive plans about great grandiose projects. Nothing had been really completed. And I said, well, chances about 55% yes, shaded toward a doubtful 55% and 45% no, but you know, might as well give it a try. It'll be a tough legal battle, and so they decided to do it and hire me, figuring that somebody just out of the city government must know something about real estate law and this type of thing. And I'm very happy that we have set into motion totally without any possibility of it being revoked the final form of the building literally forever, because it is locked in by lease, by land and building lease, by law of the city and the state, that it cannot change in any form in the exterior. Obviously the interior will be changed thousands of times over the next period of time.
What's the status of the building program? What do we have to look forward to?
Well, all of the funds have been raised, which is nice, from private sources, about 80 million. It is all under construction. It is all on or under the budget as far as the construction is concerned.
Tell us what some of the components are.
Yeah. We have Egyptian as one of them, but the wings will be the Temple of Dendur in 1978, September. Then after that will be the Rockefeller, the Museum of Primitive Art, the enormous steel truss over the garage. The garage was a part of this too. Then after that will be in probably early '79. We're going to have to time the openings of these bloody things to, so they don't all open the same month, which would be kind of confusing. Then after that, American, which will be after the Rockefeller, and after that, the whole Southwest complex, which is a grand enclosed court with that old facade preserved. Marvelous series of terraces and galleries leading up to the new paintings galleries above the Rockefeller, and then the Southwest wing, which is the one similar in shape to the American on the north that goes out into museum property on the southwest side. And that will be 1980, I guess. But they're all the bids are in, which is a critical factor when you look at it as far as money is concerned. And they're all on or under, which is kind of strange, yes, but
what happens when all the buildings are built and the museum, at least its exterior, is frozen? What do you concentrate on then?
Well, the next phase of the whole institution, we're now kind of between two ages. Somebody once asked me, you considered you brought the museum into the 20th or the 21st century? And I said, no, you just don't understand. All I was doing was to finish up the 19th century part. And what I've been doing is really a rather curious anachronism. Imagine finally going out and collecting pieces, the volumes of the encyclopedia. We should have had it long before. Completing a building that had been started in 1878. The innovation, the new things will come later, it seems to me. And the new will be, again, as everything in this institution is, linked with that original point of view. And when the building is finished, other than the mutable interiors, when the collection is pretty well with us, and it is now, because there are almost 3 million works of art, very few gaps are left, then the obvious next step is to do something with contemporary tools of communication, those things that are well within the technotronic era, to tell people, to teach them, to educate them about what it is that we have, because simply a vast collection of things, inert, somewhat mute, is in our opinion wrong and doesn't conform to the charter of 1870. And if we didn't do that, I guess the Attorney General would step in and say, what are you doing?
Are you saying that you see the future direction of museums as educational institutions?
No, I'm not. I don't know anything about other institutions. They have their charters and their definitions. What I'm saying is that for the Metropolitan, that's going to be the next stage, without any question. What we would like to do is not only disseminate to the broadest possible audience, up to postgraduate level, not only about things in this institution, but the entire world of fine arts. And we'll endeavor through such machinery as this, and such things as film, and the new breakthroughs in technology and communications, attempt to bring through this place where many of the experts are, because we have all the fields, the entire world of fine arts. It really, the next step of a place like this, now having built the bulwarks, will be to have a museum without walls. But curious, you seem to have the magnet of objects, the mother lode, the weight of it, and the bulwark of walls and things to show it, before you can really free yourself from that and go outside and bring the outside in. And that would be the logical next step.
You've referred to some gaps. What are the most glaring omissions in the collections?
Well, I think specific artists, there are quite a few. We do not have a Donatello. We do not have a sculpture by Michelangelo. That type of thing. I think general gaps would be German painting of the late 15th and early 16th century, but we rectified that by a curious mode of acquisition. We made a long-term exchange loan with the Pinakothek in Munich, and have at this point 4 German paintings of that period that I just described, and we'll exchange over a period of 20 years that type of material, which you cannot find in the market, and if you do, it's very expensive and likely is not very good.
I assume more and more museums will have to engage in that kind of exchange.
I think they will. I don't think they are very prone to do so. We have never been able to do this on a serious basis with any of our colleague institutions in the United States. It is in Europe that we turn our eyes to, because we've become an international institution, and quite frankly, if you want the inventory of German painting of late 15th and early 16th century would tend to be in Munich rather than in someplace in this country. But we're doing that with the government of India. We cannot, it is illegal to collect Indian sculpture. So we go to them and negotiate, and they will send us 30 or 40 fabulous pieces of sculpture on a 10-year basis in exchange for something that they want, which happens to be lace, curiously enough, and we have a great amount of material in the textile room on lace.
We're going to have to pause for a moment.
For a commercial.
I thought every 20 minutes we have to change. We're going to continue now. In your career, you've been the director of the cloisters, the commissioner of parks, and for these past 10 years, the director of the Metropolitan. Which of those jobs did you like best, and why?
I always like the one I'm in because it gives me a false sense of security. And that's really the one I like, because I don't remember anything about the others. I have a terribly short memory, and I'm curiously a very focused person, and I really only know and remember and usually only what today. I mean, I can't really remember what happened a year ago, certainly not 2 years ago.
Well, in years past, you've talked of public office, either appointed or elected. Does that interest you?
Oh, no, other people did. I always said no.
I've heard you talk about it.
I said that I did not want to ever go into elective office because I think it is a problem, and I think maybe a point of office, but I don't think it's very attractive these days.
Might that situation change in any way that would interest you on a federal level?
Definitely not.
And there is nothing on a city or state level either?
No, not with the current regimes.
Well, if there was a change of administration, might that be of interest to you?
Well, it's not only a change of administration, it would be a change of monetary possibilities.
So it's not the nature of the job, but the realities of dollars and cents that would curtail that job that turn you off?
Yeah, I think it's a question now in terms of the broad economic policy of the state and the city that is going to be definite consolidation, and there are people who do that a heck of a lot better than I do, and I'm not particularly interested in this period. I think it's a restraining period, and that's not my nature. I think it would drive me crazy.
But you do have an imagination and a vision. What would be an ideal ministry of culture, so to speak, for this country?
I personally don't believe in it. I think it, for this country, is impractical, possibly undemocratic, and probably frightfully expensive with no great results. Most of the cultural institutions in this country are either public, private, or private. And their public nature is really kind of you take the land, the building, the city, and you boys do everything else. So the essence of most of these things, the creative side of it, the performance side of it, really is in the public sector, the private sector. Therefore, to have a minister of culture or something like that, the individual wouldn't have anything to do except get in the way of the professionals, and as usual the government would start injecting into its own agency a great deal of money that would be wasted and would never come out to the product. And it would endanger the government quicker taking over some of the institutions which we in them try to avoid. Because we don't think it's right for the taxpayer, quite frankly, that they should have some sort of a great big bureaucracy that's going to begin to run these things inefficiently. So I think it's fairly decent the way it is. There are the two endowments. They have begun gently to get into operating funds. They should pursue that, but not beyond a certain point. Things have been wrecked in this country because of not a political cliche of big government. It's just messing around too much.
More and more museums have to rely on the public sector, and it sounds to me as if you're suggesting that museums should be more self-reliant on their own resources rather than external.
I believe that, but it's awfully easy to believe that from the Metropolitan. It's a fairly decent address. It seems to have a few objects that people take to, and we do tend here to be a little out of touch with the reality of other institutions around the country, and sometimes even, you know, huff and puff about bad management or faulty management, which I think is a bit arrogant of us, because if you put my management team out someplace and say, okay, now balance the budget, honey, it might not be so easy. But here it is not so far that difficult, but it's a struggle. I think that by and large, museum management, and I don't talk about curatorial work or professional work or anything like that, but raw management doesn't really exist at the level that it should. There aren't any professional people who are purely in cultural management, or there are darn few of them. And our experience was to get the people we needed for finances and for planning for operations and so on, we had to go to a professional headhunting firm and recruit them from business, which we did, and found their work was very, very good, no different than it would be with W.R. Grace or something like that.
You mentioned the good address of this museum. Apparently you feel that way on both sides of the street. Now that the physical plant is frozen, at least in terms of the park, you've recently purchased 2 buildings across the street. Do you have any plans for them, and do you have any other plans for buying buildings in this area?
We bought the 2 buildings, 6 and 8 East, I guess 82nd Street. They were the property of the New Lincoln School. The New Lincoln School had a debt that they wanted to wipe out, and the sale of these buildings did that. They were able to take the students, particularly the very young ones, and put them in another one of their facilities. In the midst of this enormous, complex building program, we simply had to get office space on a temporary basis to house some of the functions. The whole American wing, the whole American Paintings Department is in offices in the New Lincoln School, as is all of the people who handle the merchandising activities. That will be maybe for 3 years. They will come back into the offices now being built for them, and we'll either retain New Lincoln School for that type of thing, or we'll sell it. And since it was a very favorable price, we are quite convinced that we will turn over a fairly decent profit. That's what we used it for. It was really a nearby office building, in a sense, that had been used as such. But we're not going to do anything other than that with it. We're not going to, by the way, assemble property and build condominia.
Do you have any other innovative fundraising plans? Are you taking in boarders too?
No, we don't think that, again, you see, we are, the building is owned by the City of New York, and unlike other institutions that are purely private, we don't have air right capabilities, and we couldn't possibly go that particular route if we wanted to. And I would imagine with us, the Internal Revenue Service would rule it as an unrelated business expense. I think if we put up bought the Stanhope, put up I think they might question it. So we wouldn't be going into that type of thing.
You said your merchandising facilities are housed across the street.
Just the offices.
I
the shops
assume
are
that.
here.
I guess, too, more and more museum directors pride themselves on their ability to market their merchandise, and I assume they take a leaf from your book. You also make reference to the numbers of people you've had to recruit from the private sector, from business. Do you think that a future museum director will have to be more of an administrator than an art historian?
Probably, I would say if he is not now 95% administrator, he probably won't last very long, or if he does, he's not very good. My job is at least 95, maybe more than that percent, simply executive and administration. I very infrequently deal with works of art.
That must be very painful
like that. No, it's the type of job I knew exactly what it was going to be, and it's, university presidents don't teach, they fundraise, and sometimes get in the way. And that's generally what I do, fundraise and direct the general traffic, but allow the sections that have been built up to handle their specialties.
Do you plan to take on any other curatorial tasks?
Oh, no, I couldn't. I would be very bad at that. The reason is if when you lose the saturation, when you cannot every week digest the new periodicals and the articles in a particular field, then you really quite lose touch. It's like if you don't use a particular muscle for a while, you just can't jump around it. You have to exercise it slowly back into shape. So I couldn't, and I don't, and I haven't, and I've made it a very definite rule that I wouldn't do that.
How significant is the merchandising operation for the operation of a museum these days?
I don't know of anybody else, but ours is getting to be fairly modestly significant. Again, we have an enormous amount of material to draw upon.
More than other museums because of tax laws as well. Need not anything that is reproduced be, mustn't it be related to the nature of the collections?
It should be, according to the Internal
Unless you want to do a Mondrian sheet, another
museums. That you
museums.
handle in a way that the IRS has also approved. There are two ways of doing it. One is
how does the law handle that reproduction in a tax-free institution?
Reproduction they consider like a reproduction of a painting in a book, a reproduction. Adaptations, you can only, under the IRS, gain revenues if it is a royalty system. And they disallow you from starting a sheep factory or a cup factory. So anything that's an adaptation, you have to do on a royalty system. We don't ever get into the problem of copyright, which a museum dedicated to more modern things might well run into. The Museum of Modern Art cannot just go out and reproduce things if they are still within the copyright law. It's not feasible economically for them to do it. They could get the permission, but it wouldn't be feasible. But we're blessed by, nobody's going to call a copyright on you if it's a faience figure of Amenhotep III. These lawyers and scribes are long silent.
Tell us some numbers. What is the annual revenue from your shops?
Gross is about 9. Net profit's $1.7 million.
And the
10
annual
years ago it was $80,000.
And what do you project 10 years hence?
We're building a new facility off the North Bookshop. If you just walked through that wall, the west wall, and walked into what is a little-known light well.
What was there before, a light well?
There is, yeah. We're building a 5.5-story arts publication center in there. And I would imagine we figured that the net revenues in 5 years will be $5 million, 4.5 to 5.
What's the annual budget of the museum?
$27,700,000.
And its annual attendance?
It ranges from about 2.8 to 3.3.
What was it when you came?
It was about 5.5 million.
You're saying that it's less than almost half of what it was?
Yes, but again, with statistics, one has to be very careful. They used a marvelous system of clicking some sort of a button thing that counted people coming in. It's okay when 1,000 people come in, but if 10,000 come in, somehow you can't distinguish from a crowd people, so they just keep clicking. And they thought the bosses liked to see a lot of people coming. So we ran absolutely accurate tests. And
How did
found
you
out
do that?
It was, well, we put in photoelectric counters. We now have this admissions, curious admissions thing, which counts on the electronic cash registers. We have an absolutely accurate count, and it dropped from 5.5 to about 2.3.
So that you're saying that the numbers game was something that always concerned museum directors, but I suspect now more than ever. How much?
I don't believe it does for us. We're actually more concerned of too many people in certain areas than we are of lack of people.
Well, that's a question I'd like you to address yourself to. How far can the audience be expanded when box office starts intruding on scholarship?
I don't know, because I don't know if the question has got any validity. We don't happen to think about box office. We're not in Broadway, and we're not in the entertainment film business. So it's nothing that I can't see how it would apply here.
How far can you envision this audience being expanded?
Well, with an additional 800,000 square feet, I would say it could double and be perfectly all right. It would be, it's 60% more than space than we have.
How many people come on a Sunday?
An enormous Sunday is about 27,000 people.
And a Wyeth Sunday?
22, 23, but Egyptian is outdrawing Wyeth 2-1. As indeed Islamic did, and still is rather close to Wyeth. Misnumbered 9 shattered.
You have accurate counts for that too, I assume. If you were to give a reading list on art history, aesthetics, art criticism, what books would you recommend?
I would say The Meaning in the Visual Arts, a collection of essays of Erwin Panofsky. I would say probably Verflin. These are the general ones. Then the Cambridge Ancient History for the entirety of the ancient world, 17 to 20 volumes. You can pick through them, obviously. You don't want to get bogged down in Assyrian military concepts and so on. But they're the most concise, marvelous layout of the art history. In each one of the volumes there is a piece by one of the greatest experts, and always brought up to date. And they're very thin, maybe 150 pages just on the art. And they're in there with all of the other things. And the lovely thing about it is that you can look at the art section and say, wait, and then go immediately in the historical section to something that then folds art into the other aspects of society. I think the Pelican history is excellent, which really is dealing with all of the period that we're talking about. And they've really done a superb job. The Pelican history, which is ongoing, as you know, and re-edited. Jansen's general book is quite acceptable. Certainly beats Robin Garrison. And that would be kind of, a start, but then each field one would have to delve into it. Also, as much documentary gathering together as one can. What the artists themselves said, which people tend to overlook because authors, begin to say, well, of course I know more than this Schmendrick. And they begin to take words out of the artist's mouth, which is nasty and slightly unsanitary. But it's good to go back to those sources and read them. Most of them are translated.
Who and what were the greatest influences on your own aesthetic development? Was there a teacher? An individual?
Well, the man who showed me the path to go into art history is a fellow by the name of Kurt Weitzman, a very eminent, now retired professor at Princeton. His specialty is Byzantine. And he showed me the way in my sophomore year and was my docent in the PhD. So he is the single most important influence. He was very deep on methodology. It's like being a theoretical mathematician. I spent many, many months, several years, on the reconstruction of non-existent things.
What was your
We all
doctoral
knew that
thesis?
they didn't exist, but we spent a great deal of time constructing them. So it was really, I was a theoretical art historian more than a factual one.
Did it relate to ivories, your doctoral thesis?
It did, but it was, that was only part of where I went. There was more than just a paper doctorate. You had 4 years before you were allowed to even start on a doctorate of general art history and languages and documents and the methodology of Greek and Latin. And then this marvelous reconstructing of things that didn't exist. We spent, I guess, a year reconstructing a Bible of the religion of Mithra, which in all likelihood never existed. But by the end of this year, we had the most beautiful set of Mithraic writings. Spooky, huh? All right. Move on to the next one.
Where did Mr. Rorimer find you?
Well, I met Jim Rorimer at one of these symposia that young graduate students used to, I think they still do, go either at the Frick Museum or here at NYU, and you give lectures, 20 minutes, no more, no less, on a paper that you developed, and he happened to be in the audience, and I gave a lecture on something that he thought might relate to an object that he had just purchased.
What were you talking about?
Grabbed me and took me over to see the object. I didn't even know who the hell he was. I was talking about the classical and antique references in the Galleria Farnese, things that by luck I was able to discover that the entire Galleria is a joke, a set of artistic puns relating to the collection of the Farnese family, that all the figures garbed in great pompous classical and neoclassical subject matter simply are very cute, almost cloying references to pieces of sculpture and antiquities, right down to cameos that they happen to have had in their collection. And it was a giant family in-joke, which did not actually damage the work of art, because it really on its own it's rather pleasant. But, see, getting spooky.
We're going to cut here. Perhaps tell us about that. How did you ever discover that? But wait till we come back.
By luck.
Sorry?
By luck. It's kind of non-laboratory.
You were talking about the chance discovery that you made, and I think made the analogy to theoretical mathematics. Would you clarify what you mean?
Well, in this peculiar paper, I was given the paper, an assignment of a seminar report to do the fresco cycle of the Galleria, and was supposed to talk about the general classical feeling of it. And by sheer accident, in studying the frescoes and so on, and by passing over my desk a book of line drawings of various sculptures and collections all over the world at late 19th century gathering together by Solomon Reinach, I saw to my utter surprise that one of the curious line drawings of a sculpture in Naples, taken from a curious angle, was exactly, or very close to, a figure flying down from heaven in the Galleria Farnese. I said, now wait a minute. Naples, that was the Museo Borbonico, that's where the Farnese junk ended up, you know. It was kind of amusing, and began to try to picture the flat painting figures like that in other angles, and found 55, quite obviously, where they were placed in other, you know, he'd take, let's say, a Doryphorus and make it into a different god and turn it into a strange angle and fly it at you. So they were all puns of what they had. And got in touch with a buddy of mine who was still in Italy, and by crude drawings, got him to go down and take photographs in Borbonico, Museum of Naples, other places, and put them in the same, and they were rather shattering. You'd put one this photograph next to a photograph of the fresco, and it told the tale. And that was kind of pleasant. It happened purely by chance.
What is your favorite period?
Now, I think my favorite period is Ptolemaic Egyptian material. I'm one of these typical American boys. I like the underdog, and indeed try to get people to look again out of the stereotype vision which some have, most have, on things that are either discarded because of taste or fad, because to me taste is the enemy of art. And fad is a scungier enemy in league with taste. This is the reason why I was intrigued with Andrew Wyeth. I recognize that the so-called serious people, the sophisticates, had dismissed him and had no longer looked at it, and wanted to do the exhibition because I wanted people to get a little steamed up and look at it. As you know from the conversation here, it doesn't work all the time, but I like to try to make people look again rather than just mutter their old stereotype images and continue to wrap themselves up in a little intellectual baggies, which is normally the case in people who are not really looking anymore. People, they observe, but they don't look. There's quite a difference between seeing and looking. So I tend to like fields that are on the outside. I adore Hellenistic art. Ever since Marguerite Bieber wrote a book slamming it. She says it was degenerate, decadent. But it isn't. Art does not do that. Art is not like a physical human being. It does not have a vigorous youth, a marvelous maturity, and a declining old age. It just doesn't. It changes styles because it's utterly unconnected, being various artists who do not sit around and say, now we are in middle age. Now we're going to have to decline. When you look at, let's say, grandiose figures, it's awfully pleasant to look at what people thought about Giambattista Tiepolo in his own time, exalted. In various other times he was terrible, decadent, immoral, lousy, stuffy, stiff. And then he came back again. So this happens. One must, in a sense, like a scientist, totally disassociate one from taste, fad, and sophistry. New York happens to be, in my opinion, one of the capitals of artistic sophistry in the world. So we're blessed at least to have that. We have something. Whether it'll save default, I wouldn't know. But
if what's out is in with you, what do we have to look forward to next year?
Well, you're going to get a big section of Ireland. I've always been fascinated by the real shock it will be if we could get the Book of Kells here.
It's never left Ireland, I assume, other than to be rebound in England.
No, it was on exhibition. 2 volumes were on exhibition in 1962 in the Royal Academy, but that, whether that's Ireland, okay, no politics. I also wanted to get the Book of Kells, the Book of Armagh, the Book of Durrow, the Tara Brooch, the Armagh Chalice, these incredible interlaces, to see what would happen when people of us, who are used to, step back and you'll see the painting, right? Step back and you'll see the abstraction. Or the painting is what it is, purely abstract. It survives, it exists, it has its own internal existence. Whereas actually the Irish things in the 7th, 8th, and 9th century are totally and completely the opposite. And we are getting all of those materials, I'm happy to say. We signed the contract with the Irish government.
Is there glass and silver?
Silver and gold. There's very little glass. But I want to see what it will be like and how one, as a presenter of works of art, overcomes the terrible cultural abyss between us who look at things from a distance and how you look at these things, where, as St. Bernard of Clairvaux said, your eye must pass over every tiny tendril, in and out. You have to follow it and track those little beasts, and back and forth, and in and out, in order to be able to have any appreciation of all, of what is aesthetically close to the Holy Spirit. Now that's a real challenge. And how you really do that, I don't know yet. But at least we got the stuff. So as again, you got to have the stuff before you can really do about it. So the stuff is coming in September 1977.
We've asked each of our...
So there's, that's let's see what other kind of on the outs thing.
When is Tutankhamun?
Tutankhamun is not on the outs.
No.
That's just beautiful. That's just very strange, marvelous stuff.
We've asked each of our guests...
Yeah, we're doing a show of Daniel Chester French, which opens early
Spring.
November. Again, deliberately, because this is somebody they have taken it for granted, this sculptor. He's a realist romantic, huh? And damn it, he's something, so we'd like to have people look at it. You've asked each of your guests?
The same question, and that question is, who is your favorite artist? And regardless of price or availability, what object would you choose?
I can't answer it because it's not in the realm of my particular reality. I don't have one single favorite artist. And,
Can you mention several whose
don't.
work you particularly respond to?
I have such an intense passion for most of all of them. With me, it's a question of what I'm just beginning to understand. I hated Cézanne for many years. I think I'm beginning to hate him less. And I'm beginning to realize that maybe he wasn't just a coarse, smelly, pompous, southern idiot, almost fraudulent. I'm beginning to think there may be something there. For example, I'm beginning to understand Van Eyck. Beginning. But I'm not sure. So it's not a question of favorite, it's a question of what is my level of understanding and maturity towards that. We have a totally different attitude at the Metropolitan than others institutions, since we are collecting history, what has survived, and take no moral judgments. We don't care if it's in good taste or in bad taste. We want to know of what happened to exist, no matter what anybody said about it. Is it good quality? Therefore, that curious attitude, which to us is fundamental, it's awfully hard to say my favorite Egyptian artist is whatever, it's more the piece than an artist. And the question of what would I buy, what's available. There's several things I would like to have bought recently, but we didn't for one reason or another.
For example?
A marvelous Gauguin still life that went at auction here. We raised $1,400,000 and didn't buy it because we were afraid of what the political ramifications would be in the city during the time of financial difficulties. And we also raised $3,500,000 to buy, or go after at least, Duccio di Buoninsegna, the great cavalry. And backed off that for the same reason, and the hammer at the auction went down at 1.8. But I think probably we were right in both cases. It's the first example that I recall that we acted on other than purely the object, that looked at other manifestations surrounding it. And I think it was a practical reality, but I would like to have had both those pieces, and indeed we did have the money, I'm pretty sure, to raise for it.
What gives you the greatest pleasure in being director of this museum?
Well, really seeing that now this whole building thing that I was hired to do is it.
Do you
That's
think in
locked in, and
terms of your next job?
Occasionally.
What would you like it to be?
I know what it's going to be. I'm going to teach.
And where and what will you teach?
That I'm not sure of. I don't know. Art history, I mean, not anything else.
And what do you consider to be your most enduring accomplishment here?
The building.
And your biggest single failure?
Taking the job.
Now, none of us believe that.
I mean it.
If you had it to do over again, what would you do otherwise?
If I had it to do over again, I probably would think a little more seriously about taking it, and probably wouldn't have taken it.
Why? It's sort of hard to believe, Tom. It's been
Well,
the dream job in museums all over the world, and for a man of your appetites and scales.
That's what they tell you, but when you get into it, it is not particularly dream in many respects. It is, of course, in others, but no, it's a question of whether you can go home again.
You mean in this instance, having worked here
That's
before?
right, yeah.
And explain that.
I don't know whether or not I've wasted a great deal of my time in being the last of the 19th century directors here. It had to be done, I guess. But I wonder if, sometimes I wonder whether or not that was the proper thing to do.
Did you ever consider the possibility that you might be the first of the 21st century directors here?
But that clearly I'm not. Because all we were doing really, and we discussed it at length, it was to finish the 19th century thing, which is the completion of the building and the more or less fleshing out of the major sections of the encyclopedic collection. And that really is that really is rooted very much in the 19th and early 20th century aspect of the institution. And that's what the charge was then, and it just took that.
Do you really mean you would have second thoughts about this job? Is it obviously you've been a lightning rod for controversy, but you like that.
Well,
somehow you managed to survive.
So was Warmer. I mean, even
Yes.
Chisnola, God, he was sued. He's the first one, Palmedy Chisnola. He,
Yes, they got the collection and the director.
yeah, got the collection and the director and about 85 lawsuits. And he had a marvelous lawsuit against an art critic, and it was on the front page of, then there were about 20 papers, of every one of them. In order to prove that this stuff was real, he allowed people to come in with hatchets and mallets and screwdrivers and pry bars and smash one of the sculptures to pieces in the middle of the Great Hall. Can you imagine what the New York Times would say about that act of dignity today?
And while you're on that subject,
everybody in this
what do
job
you
goes through a lot of flack, when you really read back, with
And
very
I've been
few
doing that, and they
exceptions,
certainly do.
and they certainly do. It just it depends on what's going on.
What do you think of the state of art criticism and art reporting in this country? Be objective.
I think the problem with the critics, and there are now some new ones that are not trained. They do not have a solid background in professional training in art history, or they are PhD manqués, and therefore resent anybody who has gone beyond that. They don't have time, poor souls, to really thoughtfully look and then digest and then write about something. The schedule that these poor people are forced to do is appalling. They have to go to 4 or 5 or 6 openings literally every 2 days. They have to have a piece a day, sometimes more than one, plus a big Sunday piece, plus a magazine piece. And I don't see how it's possible for them to have anything more than necessarily rather quick approach to it. This is unlike, let's say, France, when André Chastel was the art critic for Le Monde. Great art historian, very beautifully trained, member of the Institute. And he would write maybe once, 2 times a week at the most. But what he wrote, because he was very selective about it, was extraordinary, and still is. In that particular paper, they simply had notices on gallery openings. Here, it's a different monetary situation, is it not? Huh? And I have a feeling the art critic sometimes here has to write about what goes on in commercial galleries.
What are you inferring?
Well, I think this thing's called advertisements and this type of thing. I don't know, I just have a feeling they're overworked in such a way that they can't really give full thought to it. When you read their stuff, it becomes more and more thin, and the same type of phrases come up, and they get tired. And their tiredness is manifested in sometimes thoughtless and vicious or quick or sophistic type of points of view in prose. There are two, I think, in the entire country that are other than that, and I think they do a very good job. They both are writing in New York City, which is...
Who are they?
I think John Russell is in this category, and I think Tom Hess of New York Magazine is in this category.
Who decides what's shown in this museum?
Well, there's an exhibition committee of the staff. There's a staff policy committee of the staff. Eventually there's an ad hoc exhibition committee of the Board of Trustees, which doesn't initiate it.
How much influence do the trustees have?
None in this area. They ride herd on the finances and, keep you pretty well on your toes about, are you on the budget? But never in my experience have they said anything about what it should be. Maybe one will say, gee, it'd be awfully nice to have a, and usually the answer is, right, we're doing it. And what we try to do is to bring about a balance. It used to be this institution had nothing but painting shows. And as you can see, we've strayed very violently away from that. Wanted to show the fullness of art, what we have. 20% is paintings in this institution only. And wanted to emphasize such things as archaeology and strange things that people hadn't thought about, or things that nobody will ever see. One of the big things is we'd like to get things from abroad that people cannot see at all in this country. And flesh out what we have with that type of experience. Obvious example of that is the Scythian gold, which 2 pieces maybe in the United States. And that's generally the attitude, but it's definitely a balance. Every department is tacitly understood to have a right to have an exhibition every, 4 or 5 years.
How many shows do you initiate?
Not many. I did the collecting show, initiated that idea. I initiated In the Presence of Kings, which was 10 years ago.
Was that the opening show of your...
That was the opening show.
For you?
Yeah. Because I did it because we didn't have any shows scheduled for a year and a half. And I said, not when I'm director, buddy. We're going to have a show when I walk in that door on the 1st of April. And they were so, great. What? I wrote an article 3 years ago on royal patronage. I just drag it out and make a show out of it. And we said, what things in the Met were made for, commissioned by, or linked with great kings and queens and so on. Well, I don't know. We stopped counting at 2,500. Literally, if you take any theme, you can illustrate it by things in this institution, but beyond your ability really to get it in one room.
To pause for a moment.
Try it. Give me a theme and I'll try to illustrate. The history of the bed. We have beds, the range of dates of our beds are 4000 BC to 1927. About 58 beds, and really super beds. For example, just to give you some idea of the scope, range, and the depth of the place. Most extraordinary. And if you throw in accoutrements for beds, prints about beds and so on, there'd be thousands of things. How about a bed show?
Let's pause for a moment.
Questions?
I have one more question to ask you, and then we're going to turn.
We're not going to share it. Yes. Are we ready?
Other than the Metropolitan, what museums do you consider among the greatest in the world?
The greatest single museum in the world, far greater than the Metropolitan in my opinion, is the Kunsthistorisches Museum in Vienna. It's spread around a bit over several blocks, but it's close enough to consider the entirety a museum. It's the greatest picture gallery that exists today, by considerable length. And it has there the great primitive material, the original things from Montezuma's treasure, very early things, Venus of Willendorf and so on, the Schatzkammer, superb drawings in the Albertina, but absolutely the best drawings collection in the world. Sublime sculpture of a very curious type, admittedly, but in one package there, it's got to rank tops, but it's on a different level entirely than the rest. Then I would say that the Louvre is second, the combination of museums in London.
When you say the combination?
Well, there they've separated decorative arts, the V&A, and antiquities and certain other curious things in the British Museum and the paintings in the National Gallery. So there's a kind of a, that was when people categorized by medium. But if you think of that as a complex, that's pretty sublime. And that's all. Now I'm talking really about these larger, more or less historical ones. They're absolute beauties that are very specific, obviously. Prado is that. And it's a royal collection, really. And
what do you consider to be
the Ambrosiana is one of the finest museums in this country. Boston is superior in general terms. Institute of the Art Institute in Chicago is dazzling in certain areas, obviously, the late Impressionists and Post-Impressionists, early Post-Impressionists. Toledo is excellent, excellent. Cleveland is very, very fine. Certain emphasis upon Oriental things, but what Sherman Lee has done in that and what Bill Milliken did before him in decorative arts and medieval things is superior. I don't talk about collections. I mean, Frick is a collection, so it really is a different category, and that's obviously marvelous.
I can recall reading that you said that you once had a fantasy to be the director of the Museum of Modern Art. Does that still persist?
Not since the professional union.
Is there any other museum job that might interest you?
No.
I think it's time now to have the class share in the interviewing process. A very special thanks to Tom Hoving, the director of the Metropolitan Museum, obviously a man of special vision and energy. I'm Barbara Lee Diamonstein. This is Inside New York's Art World. I will call on you, but I think it best if you please stand and speak as loudly and as slowly as you can, and I'll turn the microphone. This gentleman.
No, we got to just repeat it.
Okay.
Spark says no.
Are you trying to get the Norbert Schimmel collection, and what is the likelihood of getting the Schimmel collection?
Are we trying to get the Norbert Schimmel collection, and what is the likelihood? I really can't talk about it, other than the fact that it was and still is on exhibition. And about 2 months ago, Norbert Schimmel became a trustee of the Metropolitan Museum of Art and a member of the very important Acquisitions Committee. Before that, for many years, he was a very important figure in the only person in our history who was on the visiting committees of 3 separate departments: Egyptian, Greek and Roman, and Ancient Near East, because he really knows that material. And that's all I know at the present moment.
The woman in the first row.
Yeah, several years ago I heard you speak at Princeton and you talked about unearthing treasures like Islamic rooms in the basement. What have you found recently?
We found an awful lot of stuff in crates that had not yet been opened, although we do take our time here, of the Egyptian material. And there are quite a few things in the second phase of Egypt. We really knew kind of what was there, you know, because everything is recorded, but we didn't really. One thing is reading a little card, the other thing is actually taking it out of the case and seeing it. And we were shocked continually. And indeed had started off by saying, well, the primary material is in this pile and the secondary, and a lot of that was shifted, actually looking at it. And so that will continue, obviously. Ancient Near East, I think there are some things that, well, they've been in storage for so many years now. We'll have the same type of revelation there. And in the tunnel, which kind of obliquely runs through this building from the reservoir, great big red brick tunnel. It's a storm water drain off from the old reservoir. It's stacked with 19th century sculpture. You know, the type of thing, you know, Truth, the Spring, and so on. And very beautiful in a curious sense. That, I'm sure, will cause certain revelations when that's put out in the new Western European arts area, and we intend to do it.
The woman in the fifth row. No.
I believe on December 9th, are you going to have an exhibit of art of costumes of Russian court? What inspired you to sponsor that exhibit? And it's going to be just costumes or other artifacts included?
On December 9th, we're starting a show called The Glory of Russian Costume. What started the idea and what are we going to exhibit? Well, I've been to the Soviet Union a hell of a lot of times.
The student works in a gallery that deals with recently emigrated Russian artists, so her question has specific focus.
How in hell would czarist costumes have to do with the focus of that?
Well,
I'm interested in everything Russian.
Okay. Curiously enough, the only country that has not damaged, has saved everything of the royal and the nobility, and what we call rich peasant, because it's a word that in Russian doesn't say that, but there's no translation, is the Soviet Union. Because Lenin passed an order saying nothing will be touched, remembering, I suppose, what happened in the French Revolution when tapestries were burned for their gold and things were destroyed for, rage, political rage. And France did destroy most of their things. Spain similarly. England, they took it all so granted that it all disappeared anyway. And we were intrigued with that very fact of survival. We also wanted to affect a balance because we had had 3 more or less contemporary shows in the Costume Institute, following on one that was really the history of costume in 1969, and felt it was high time we did a show of historical things. And the material is untouched. So the show is going to expose things from Peter the Great up to through Paul I, and this stuff is here. And it's marvelous. Curiously enough, Diana Vreeland, our great consultant, mentioned to Yves Saint Laurent about a year and a half ago that she intended to do such a thing, and there were going to be a lot of these peasant things. He took the hint. True. And a lot of those will be there, and it'll be quite interesting. We even found the great sled of Elizabeth I, which had disappeared, and that's coming. Which is not just a sled, it's a great thing with silver brocade and green velvet. It's marvelous.
Back to your collections, those in storage, what percentage is on view most of the time?
It depends on the specific collection and why.
Overall?
You can't even explain it that way because 1%, less than a tenth of 1% of prints are on view at any time, for obvious conservation reasons. Even less drawings for obvious conservation reasons. All of the American stuff is off exhibition with the exception of the show, because we're building that. We had to shut the whole thing down. All of Islamic was off exhibition for years. Now 55% of it is on exhibition, but the rest is right up in there in those drawers and those nooks and those crannies, which can be changed and will now start slowly to change, so it'll be continually flushed. All of the Egyptian, Old Kingdom up to 11th Dynasty and 29th through Ptolemaic is out. So it really depends on where the building program is. So we would like to have it so that most is out. One, obviously, for people who want to see the finest things, others for scholars to look at Ostraka and everything else. So I describe it more that way than a percentage.
Mr. Schechter.
Which
which contemporary artist do you believe will hang someday with credit in a museum of this nature?
I suppose all of those who worked at the particular time.
No, with credit. Which artist do you believe will have the same, a kind of enduring value?
I don't know. That's the kind of the perilous thing about the contemporary field. You just don't know, and if anybody thinks they do, they're crazy. You can make educated guesses.
So what would be your educated guesses? That's what I'm asking.
Of what, you know, of the whole world?
Yeah, the artists working today, who would you say are the artists that have real merit, the kind of people that you...
Merit.
Yeah, that you...
I don't look at it in those terms. I look at it as a question of what existed of quality.
Which ones have quality of the kind that you see in this museum?
Working today or just recently? No.
Any way you want.
I think Gorky, certainly. I think certain Milton Avery. Certainly Francis Bacon. Certainly Clifford Still. Jackson Pollock. Charles Birchfield, I think Morris Graves, these curious painters. Certainly Barnett Newman. Rothko. I would imagine Klein, I'm not sure there. Very specific periods of de Kooning.
Can we make the leap into the 60s and 70s?
I don't know them very well. That's where you really get hairy. I mean, that's almost, for us, that's a little too fresh, you know? Because we deliberately don't. That's up to the modern, to the Whitney, and so on. And we...
Well, I was asking in terms of your own personal opinion.
There it is. If it's not worth very much, I can tell you that, but there it is. It'd be, rather, you know, these are village styles that we're talking about. The New York school is not a global style, it's a village style. But it's a good village style.
The gentleman.
It's hard to say. It's too early. Really, for me, it's too early. It's too early. I can bring you up to the 19th century, and then I really, the perspective isn't there. That is not by my lawyer's words to say that anybody not mentioned is necessarily in any way paragraph B, subparagraph A, not exclusive of, you know. Some poor devil was chopped off in the back of the room. Now he's mad he's leaving.
No.
Sorry, I interrupted you before you finished. Your mandate here is said to be to present an encyclopedia of art, to cover all of art, and you have said also that you have tried to expand the public's concept of what can be included in the idea of art. I'd like to focus on...
I don't agree with that.
Didn't you say so this evening?
No.
Well,
I said that the mission was to form an encyclopedia and a library of art, but not necessarily to expand it. You can't do that. It is there.
well, to include it within the concept.
Yeah.
What I'd like to focus my question upon is some of the gaps in the collections that I see in Metropolitan. First kind of gaps relate to French cultures in Europe, quite important French. The Scandinavian, Portuguese, Balkan, Slavonic. Is this art in fact in your basements, or do you not have any?
What exact part? You mentioned a large geographical area and an obviously long period of time. What specific area and what period?
Well, I see very little of any kind of Slavonic, Scandinavian, Russian.
We have an enormous amount of it, which will come out in the Western European Arts Wing is built. We have a very decent collection of icons. We have 2,000 or 3,000 things of Russian manufacture. We just purchased a great silver encasement for an icon of the mid-16th century from the Kremlin workshops. We picked it up at auction in London for practically nothing, thank God. Nobody knew it, or they thought it was a fake. And we are very, very keenly collecting in these areas, and luckily the prices are very, very low. And probably, unfortunately, it will be the next great, gee, ha, you know, everybody will begin to flog that all over the place. We quietly buy it. What other periods? I mean, be specific. We have fabulous textiles.
The other major gap that I see is an art form, and it is possible that this is because of the very nature of this art form, and I'm referring to architecture. I'd like to know what your reaction would be.
My reaction is I'm flabbergasted.
The museum of architecture is at all conceptually and physically possible.
Were you here earlier?
No.
Okay. Museum of Architecture, what? Like the Trocadero? I mean, I don't understand.
That would perform the same functions for architecture that the Metropolitan Museum performs for art.
I pointed out at one point that we have a keen desire to and attempt to carry out our desire to collect architecture. Temple of Dendur is an obvious example. Anytime we can collect architecture and interior architecture, we do, because it explains all of those other little dribs and drabs that necessarily are around. We wouldn't really go so far as to collect models, although we have a large number of models. We've had an architectural show or two from time to time, but it's terribly difficult to put on an exhibition of architecture that really makes sense. I've yet to see one. We've tried to do it, and it hasn't been, but as much as we can, well, because you're dealing with little kind of, you know, little models. You know, here's...
Because the only way to see a building is to
Here's Gropius, you know, big deal. He didn't happen to work on that scale very often. And you do it tricked up by big blow-ups of photographs, which is almost inimical to architecture. Photograph is marvelous, but it is its own thing. It is damn difficult. Maybe one way we're going to attempt to do it in this whole film thing that we're going to get into is to have one of these three-dimensional cyclorama film things, projection rooms, where we will attempt to walk you through, as you can really feel it's going by, shocked and whatever. That's, I think, the only way you can do it. Beyond what we have, the Blumenthal patio, the Fuente Chapel, the Cuxa Cloister, Perinebi's tomb, Dendur. I think we got to maybe have too much of it. Yeah, a couple more, I guess. There's a couple more.
Another question? That woman in the back.
Given your controversies of the last couple of years, what is your policy and personal feelings right now on bequeathed art and what should be done?
Wheat?
Bequeathed.
Bequeathed art? We carry out the will. You go to jail if you don't.
But do you think it's better to keep things in the cellar, unshown, than to sell it and buy something that the museum can use?
No, my attitude is if you have it, many examples of it, and there are some that are obviously lesser, and strings attached, you get rid of it. Raise the money to buy something that you don't have. We've carried it out vigorously. We got into kind of a steamed up little local flack.
Why don't you talk about museums?
Worked out guidelines with the Attorney General, and first thing we did under the new guidelines was rush to our friends in journalism to reveal all, and they said, it was a strain, that was kind of a pumped up thing. And we did it, we've done it since 1882. It was official board resolution in 1882, and we've done it ever since, and we'll continue to do it. We have to, my gosh, you have to, particularly now when it's finished. The building, you just can't, that's it. No? You got to refine and weed out. But we don't do it in areas where it's not popular. We don't take our great machines of the French Academy and sell them. We have plenty of those. We only do it in, say, Monet or Renoir or something like that. We have easily better examples or know we're going to get them. And you make a lot of money out of it and spend that money only for the acquisition of other things. That's the policy, and I think it's a very sound one.
One last question. Gentleman in the second row.
Mr. Hoving, I think perhaps my question follows the one of the gentleman next to me. You spoke earlier about the way in which the museum has chosen the very fine collection that we have assembled here. And I'm certainly one of the people that feels it is a very fine collection. You said that that means was basically looking for objects of quality from the period in which they've come. Last week, when we spoke with Arnold Glimcher, he said that as he looks at works of art, he thinks that craftsmanship is very unimportant to it, that anybody can reproduce craftsmanship.
Who is this guy? Who is this?
Arnold Glimcher, Pace Gallery. I don't remember him saying that.
I certainly don't want to champion what he said, but
You'd be well advised not to, in my opinion.
I wonder how what he says squares off with what the museum has done in collecting art, and in what he's doing purveying a new art, an art which is less concerned with craftsmanship. And more concerned.
Well, you put your finger on it. This man, whoever he is, I don't know, is obviously chosen for very good reasons to focus himself on the head of a pin, and we can't do that. 300,000 years is more than a question of, in certain periods, craftsmanship had an extremely high role, near religious, in tone. And if you go to Phidias and say, Phidias, you dummy, you've just really finished that thing off in such a sublime, marvelous way that the very moisture of a human being comes through your marble, you'll say, oh my God, what a mistake, I'll rough it up. I mean, there are periods in which craftsmanship, beautiful finish, was a very